Okay. Hi, everyone. Sorry we started just a little bit late, but we wanted to wait for others who are coming. I know that we have students from Pitt, OT. If you're a Pitt undergrad, welcome. And if you're interested in occupational therapy or if you're pre-OT, we want to welcome you. And then if you're also from Brunel University, welcome. I believe we are still waiting for one speaker, which is Tamara, who is a professor at Brunel, but hopefully she will be logging in shortly.
Oh, I'm here. Hi,
Oh,
Tiffany.
hi.
Sorry.
Oh, I
was getting
didn't
my
see
video
you
on.
there.
Hi
Thanks for
there.
being here.
Oh, good. Sorry about that.
That's totally fine. Glad you can make it. Just as a reminder, at the end, we will be sending out a survey. So just to keep that in mind. But we are ready to get started. And I would just like to go over some of the ground rules before we begin, do some of our introductions, and then we can get started. So we ask that everyone listens to our speakers and respect that everyone has their own unique experiences that may be different from yours. All microphones have been muted. Please do not turn them on unless you are called on during the Q&A session at the very end of the event. And if you have questions during the event, please type them in the chat. Or if you want to send them privately, you may message them directly to Rachel Fleming. And she is here. And she will be sending a message in the chat regarding about, there's Rachel, to like send her the questions. And she will be collecting your questions throughout the night. So we can give them to the speakers during the Q&A. So tonight we want to first hear from our COTAD chapter advisor, Jennifer White, and Paula Davis from the Pitt Office of Health Diversity. And then we will introduce our panelists for our discussion in the Q&A of occupational therapy practitioners, sharing their experience in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. So our COTAD chapter advisor, Jennifer White, is an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh Occupational Therapy Department. She has received her Master's of Occupational Therapy from the University of Washington and her clinical science doctorate in occupational therapy. She has over 17 years of clinical experience in occupation-based inpatient rehab and acute care services.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that introduction, Tiffany. I appreciate it. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Diversity in the Occupational Workplace event. It is my pleasure to kick off this event, and I just wanted to take a moment to talk about a few topics. I know most of you are familiar with occupational therapy, but for those of you who are not, or may be a little fuzzy on the details, I thought I would start off by providing you with some background information on our profession, and then move on to discuss some of the justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, or JEDI, initiatives that students, faculty, and staff at the Department of Occupational Therapy at Pitt have been working on, and then move on to talk about how COTAD Pitt chapter has reached a broader audience to promote JEDI initiatives in the Pitt community and beyond. So first off, for those of you who might be a little bit fuzzy about what occupational therapy is, occupational therapy practitioners are experts in using a holistic approach while we help people prevent, recover from, or adjust to injury, illness, or disability. We are the only profession that across the lifespan return to doing the things in life that are most important to them by using individualized daily activities, also known as occupations. Because our profession covers birth through the end of life, we are experts at individualized care. Our evaluations and interventions can appear very different from one individual to the next. However, our profession is steeped in science, evidence-based practice, and we always focus on the person, environment, and occupation. To move on to talk a little bit about the occupational therapy department at Pitt, we have had a long-standing commitment to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives. But we felt a real call to action and made a commitment to change during the challenging time of racial injustice during the summer of 2020, when George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery were all murdered while they were engaging in occupations. Just to remind you, Mr. Floyd was shopping, Ms. Taylor was sleeping, and Mr. Arbery was running. Our commitment to change is reflected in multiple ways. As a department, faculty, staff, students, alumni, we completed an overhaul of our curricula in all of our programs. So that includes our PhD program, the Doctor of Occupational Therapy program, Master of Science in Occupational Therapy, and our post-professional online Doctor of Clinical Science in Occupational Therapy. We also created occupational justice clubs to provide what I like to call a risk-friendly space to identify and discuss issues of inequity and injustice in our society. And we base these on written, video, or podcast materials. And this serves as a space for us to reflect, share thoughts, and take action. And this is our entire department. So faculty, staff, all students. And last, but certainly not least, another change that our department made, and this was a student-run grassroots initiative. Our students took charge and started Pitt's chapter of the Coalition of Occupational Therapy Advocates for Diversity. This group of student leaders has enhanced Pitt OT's JEDI initiatives by seeking out learning opportunities as current students and future practitioners. Their passion to ensure that the University of Pittsburgh COTAD chapter lived up to its mission of promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion within and beyond the Pitt community and empower students to be more comprehensive and effective clinicians was evident in the virtual and live events that they have planned and executed during the last year and a half. Just to give you a little bit of insight into some of the events, our students have hosted multiple live and virtual events, again, as I said, over the last year and a half, which embraced diversity, equity, and inclusion, and included subjects such as deaf awareness, Hispanic and Latinx heritage, multicultural ADLs, LGBTQIA+ healthcare, neurodiversity. Some more recent activities that they've done is having some workshops during the day, which included an adapted chopstick use, and also learning how to work with interpreter services when communicating with patients. So I wanted to say thank you all again for joining us this evening to discuss diversity in the occupational therapy workplace. And I will now pass the virtual microphone over to Rachel Fleming.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel. I am the communications coordinator for our Pitt COTAT chapter, and I'm going to introduce Paula today. So Paula is the Associate Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Pitt School of the Health Sciences. Paula's career has centered on higher education administration, including diversity, equity, and inclusion, recruitment and admissions, and support services for diverse student populations. Davis graduated from Pitt with a bachelor's in English and a master's in communications. In 2003, she was the first individual recipient of the Chancellor's Affirmative Action Award. All right, and with that, I will hand the virtual mic over to Paula.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I appreciate it. And how about that? I remember to unmute myself, so I'm already ahead of the game. Good evening, and I'm glad to be here. I wanted to take a bit of time to talk about the Office of Health Sciences Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and the work that we do here on campus. The mission of our office is to foster an inclusive environment for students, trainees, and faculty and staff within the health profession schools. And our mission also includes increasing the number of well-trained professionals who reflect different cultures, ethnicities, socioeconomic backgrounds, abilities, gender and gender identities, religious affiliations, gender expressions, and sexual orientation. So really our goal is to make sure that the health science schools on the University of Pittsburgh campus are welcoming and open to everyone, so that everyone who intends to pursue a health career and pursue their education here at Pitt feels that they have a place. And that's critically important. when it comes to our daily practice, we function as a consultancy for the health science schools here at Pitt. So, for example, the School of Medicine has had a diversity officer since 1979. I actually held that position for about 14 years along the way in my career trajectory. There are other schools, health science schools, that their diversity officer positions are relatively new. So my team and I work to assist those diversity officers and the remainder of their schools in building the programs that they feel that they need to make sure that their communities, their health science school communities, are welcoming, that their curricula have equity and diversity interwoven, that everyone feels that they are being heard and appreciated. So we also help with the recruitment as well. For example, we will go to the annual biomedical research conference for minority students and recruit for any health science school or program that couldn't attend on their own. And the same with the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science. So we want to cast the net broadly so that we have the capacity to diversify not only the programs here at Pitt, but healthcare workforces broadly. In addition to serving as a consultancy for the health science schools, we also have our own programmatic footprint. And by that, I mean that we host programs and initiatives that we think will benefit the health sciences as a whole and be of interest and enrich our constituencies. So, for example, some of the initiatives that we engage in on an annual basis for students in particular, recruitment is a large part of what we do. Again, reaching out to students who might be interested in pursuing their education here. We write grants to fund summer programs so that we can bring students onto campus and teach them about what we have here at Pitt and what the opportunities happen to be. But we also host mixers for students across the health sciences twice each year so that students have an opportunity to expand their networks and also build community outside of their programs. You may or may not have noticed that there's a lot of silos on this campus. So you can live and work every day within your own academic community and not really have opportunities to meet other people who are in other programs, even though they might be in your same school of the university, and certainly not people in other schools. So that networking and community building is of critical importance. When it comes to faculty, recruitment, retention, and community building are also important for faculty as well. One of the techniques for increasing diverse student bodies is to have diverse role models among the faculty. So that faculty recruitment is very critical. A lot of what we do is working with search committees to make sure that they are proceeding in an equitable fashion and that they are casting their nets as broadly as they possibly can so that they're not hiring people who are just like them, which is, as human beings, that's our tendency, right? We recognize ourselves and that's who we will recruit if we are not very conscious and intentional about what we do. One initiative that we are heavily involved in right now, along with the Provost's office, is the Race and Social Determinants of Health, Equity, and Well-Being Cluster Hire Initiative. Through this program, the Provost and the Senior Vice Chancellor for Health Sciences, Dr. Shaker, are funding 25 positions, attracting faculty who are either faculty of color or those who are doing work on health disparities and health inequities. And thus far, we have met the metric that we were hoping for across the 4 years. So we're doing very well, but now the task turns to retention. And that involves making sure that faculty have collegial relationships with other faculty on campus, that they are part of research collaboratories so that we can help them to extend their work. And similar to students, getting them out into the city of Pittsburgh. We recognize that you don't just go to school here, you don't just work here, you live here as well. So getting to know what the social fabric is like in Pittsburgh, where are the other people who like to knit, kayak, ski, whatever, all of those things help people to build social networks and expand their capacity for comfort and engagement in the city. So that faculty recruitment and retention initiative is huge for us right now. We are also taking applications for and about to roll out a social justice faculty fellowship program. And our goal for this program is to take faculty, we're piloting with one faculty member from each of the health science schools, and engage them with a community-based organization, at the same time engaging them in a didactic process, teaching them about social justice and what that actually means. What does it look like to seek social justice? What does that practice look like in organizations that are involved in that work? So we'll be rolling that out, and we will have a first cohort of faculty working in that experience or through that experience from February to December of 2022. And hopefully we will be able to continue past the pilot. But we recognize that, again, siloing, faculty work on campus, they work with the patients who come to the medical center. They work on the research that they think up. But it's really, really hard to talk about what we do for communities broadly if you don't know how to engage with communities. So we're very excited about that. Beyond those processes, we do a lot with building awareness of JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, through trainings, dialogues, and workshops, looking at implicit bias, privilege, cultural competence, et cetera. Intergroup dialogue is, I think, critical. It gives folks an opportunity to talk about what their journeys have been, what that means about the decisions that they make moving forward every day, and how they treat the people around them. So hosting those dialogues is very important for us. We also engage on the university level with the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, our umbrella office, with a town hall series called This Is Not Normal, Allyship and Advocacy in the Age of COVID-19. And it's given us an opportunity to showcase a lot of important topics that really burst to the foreground, as was mentioned earlier, with the intersection of COVID-19 and the community unrest born of George Floyd's murder and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery's. So we've examined political processes, we've examined housing, we've examined faith traditions and how that all intersects. And the next session that's coming up is on critical media literacy, and that will be on December 9th, with the understanding that there's a lot of information flying at us. How are we critical consumers of what is coming toward us, and how do we leverage that information that we are taking in? So we've invited folks from the National Association of Media Literacy Education and the Ida B. Wells Project at UNC, plus a couple of campus experts as well. So we're very excited about that. I was asked to talk, and I'll try not to drone on too long, a little bit about my personal experiences. And I thought I might reflect a little bit on what I hear from faculty, staff, and students as it relates to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I think we're all very well aware that there are a lot of racialized structures, policies, and processes that are baked into our daily lives, every facet of our daily lives, but particularly in higher education. So we have many different types of people coming into higher education, engaging with systems and structures that weren't necessarily built for them and for their edification. So we spend a lot of time sort of running block for individuals who may fall outside of whatever the norm might have been for whom those processes were constructed. working with schools to think about how they're using standardized tests that we know are biased, but are still being used to screen students for educational processes. Students who are, non-traditional in some way, shape, or form, whose engagement with higher education is going to be different than what others might expect, and how we can make a space for all those people. I won't use the word accommodate because that means, to me, sort of a mechanical process of making space for people, as opposed to doing an equity check and making sure that each step in each process is equitable and available to everyone. And I hear, those types of, equity car crashes from folks all along the educational spectrum, and from the staff as well. And that's part of our job, to help them to navigate those difficulties, but then also to educate the folks who are tasked with implementing policies, implementing procedures, building processes by which people come into the university, so that they are aware of where the equity breakdowns may be, so that we can repair them. And again, make the university a welcoming place for everyone. And why is all of this important? It's important, number one, so that we have an opportunity to add to the healthcare workforce people who are aware that there are inequities that impact not only their colleagues, but also the patients that they serve. Many times, those engagements and those equity car crashes that people have can be mentally taxing. We want to make sure that we are sending people who are whole and sane out into the healthcare workforce to take care of our patients and our communities. And at the end of the day, we are all biased. We carry our biases with us every day and everywhere we go. So we want to make sure that the folks that we are putting out there as healthcare providers are aware of their biases, so that they can check themselves in the decisions that they make about patient care, and how patients are included or excluded. And as they become leaders, how they can impact healthcare delivery organizations to make sure that the care that's being delivered is equitable. We'll never get rid of health disparities if we don't do that. It's a labor of love. It's a passion. It's a privilege, and I'm happy to be able to do the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. So my name is Julia, and I'm the second year chapter chair from our Pitt COTAB chapter. And now I'm going to introduce our panelists for tonight. So our first panelist is Dr. Tamara Mills, and Dr. Mills has been an occupational therapist for over 22 years. If we could click the next slide so we could show. Yeah. So Dr. Mills has been an OT for over 22 years and is an associate professor at the School of OT at Brno University. She completed her bachelor's in OT at Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, and her master's degree, certificate in assistive technology, and PhD in rehab science from Pitt in 2004. Dr. Mills' clinical experience includes acute care, home health, inpatient rehabilitation, subacute rehabilitation, and private practice. Our next speaker is Maria Lopez Coxon. She has her bachelor's in rehab science from the University of Pittsburgh and both her master's and doctorate in occupational therapy from Boston University. She is a pediatric occupational therapist based in St. Louis, Missouri, and specializes in the evaluation and treatment of infants and children with feeding difficulties, and has professional experience in both inpatient and outpatient settings. Maria currently co-leads the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee within the St. Louis Children's Hospital Therapy and Audiology Services Department. Next, we have Kamari Shepard, who recently graduated with her master's in occupational therapy. She has a strong passion for disability advocacy. During her level 2 fieldwork, Kamari and Dr. Allison Stover conducted one of the largest to date studies and one of the experiences of disabled OT professionals and disabled OT students. In her free time, she donates her time as an IEP and 504 plan advocate for Ohio Hands and Voices. And finally, we have Christy Jane. Christy completed her bachelor's degree in occupational therapy from Manipal University, India, where she served as an occupational therapist. Christy also recently graduated from the MSOT program at Pitt. Through her experiences growing up in diverse backgrounds, Christy has been able to integrate her experiences and practice to help improve the educational experiences of OTs and empower adults through occupational therapy. So now I'll pass it off to Amber, who will start our questions for our panelists.
Thanks, Julia. So I'm going to ask questions, and panelists, you can all feel free to answer each of them, or if some of you want to contribute to each of them, whatever works best for you. So the first question we have is, how can we increase diversity and support underrepresented students in occupational therapy?
Hi, Tamara. I'll go ahead and start to answer my perspective on the question. So increasing diversity is I think a big goal, should be a goal for what OT programs strive to obtain. Methods, I think, have varied across the years, and I've been in academia full-time for the past 9 years, and one of the ways, and I think even for me as a student in growing up, or when I was getting ready to go into school, is I was very smart academically, book smart. I had a good GPA, a high GPA, but I did not do as high or as well on standardized exams like the SAT. It took that numerous times, and tutoring. And so sometimes I think that the standardized test assessments like the SAT and the GRE at times can, and I don't have any research behind as far as numbers and the percentages of students from people of color or African American students and how they perform on these types of standardized exams. But I do sometimes think there are factors that are limiters for students, either one, even applying and even getting started and applying for graduate programs in occupational therapy. And then also I think it's a limiting factor in them getting admitted. So when you have, I think of typical practices that I don't mind sharing necessarily from what I have been involved in at the University of Pittsburgh. And I interview students and I'm now more in a kind of a /site coordinator role. So I will have more input and involvement in the selection of students and looking at their portfolios. But typically we looked at GPAs. We looked at GPAs or their performances in the sciences, their prerequisites, and that was the cutoff. And so if you did not have those types of scores or grades, or if we had the GRE, and Brenau does not require the GRE for our programs, MS or OTD. And so I know that students have shared with me that is part of the reason they apply. So increasing diversity to me is one, looking at your entrance methods or entrance elements that you have as part of your portfolio for universities. And I think now we have much more of a broader aspect of not just looking at one thing, but looking at students from, did they switch majors, looking at other factors in their transcript. What type of sciences were they taking before? What were their experiences in volunteering, their work experiences, how they do on our essay. And we have still in person, well, they've been Zoom lately, but in-person interviews or group interviews. And so they look at a lot more factors, I think, in making that decision. And so I've applauded our director in just opening up and being a little bit more flexible in the requirements for admission into our program. And so I think also involvement in recruitment from the high school level. So I've been involved in high school, it's a high school honors, high school scholars program in which students who are in They are county related to the main campus outside of Atlanta. Brunel University, the main campus is in Gainesville, which has a large Hispanic population, and around the school, the inner city schools are heavily made up of or consist of students who are of color. And so their program targets these schools, and they come to the university and have different programs. There's actually an event tomorrow that I'm going to be at from them from last week and this week to expose them. So they come in and they get to see nursing and go through our sim lab, and we set up different stations related to OT, and just it's not really talking to them about how to get into school, but showing them and exposing them to the health professions and letting them see where we are. And also I think obviously having faculty of color that are there represented can show other students and let them see that it's not sometimes what they think, that only certain people get into school, or opportunities that are available are there for everyone. So I think the twofold is going after the younger population for the kids and teenagers in high schools, to expose them to what OT is. And also once they're trying to get in and they're finished their undergrad degree, the methods in which we select for student recruitment as well as acceptance into our program need to look at, or I recommend that they look at, a variety of aspects, and not like have everything set on just the GPA or scores related to standardized exams.
I think that you're right. Reaching that high school age range is really so important, because I know the first time I ever really heard about occupational therapy wasn't until I was almost done with my bachelor's. And even then, like when I told friends and family that I was going to go to grad school to become an OT, the only people who knew what OT was were my friends with disabilities, because they had experienced it themselves in school. And so I think having awareness and having people who are thinking about like what their career path is going to be know that we're an option is a big piece of that. And I think having kind of peer-to-peer support when students are going through our programs does a lot in terms of supporting underrepresented students and retaining them, because there's a lot of like data, just kind of like not necessarily in OT programs, but like across education, that when students feel connected and they feel welcome, they do better academically. So I think that's a very valuable piece of this. And so I'm glad things like COTAD National's mentoring program exist.
Going off what Camry said, just being able to interact with different groups within the program and even outside the program. I remember at Pitt and in my undergraduate program in Manipal, one thing that our faculty always told us is being in a classroom with diverse students is a distinct and unique experience, and it's something that we should all take advantage of. Because when we start interacting with them, we start to know their stories, like how Dr. Mills was saying. We know where they come from, what their barriers were, what their advantages are in society, within the program itself. And so when I was practicing as a clinician, we had these groups where we used to talk to faculty and students from all parts of India. And like, when you understand India, it's 28 states, each state has its own language, own culture, and it's just a very, very diverse experience. And so when we came to know about what our students were going through, what our faculty were going through, what our colleagues were going through, we got a more overall understanding about where people come from, what they have to go through in order to access healthcare, access education, and even like as Camry was saying, being like retained in an educational program. And in a lot of instances, especially in the clinical field, we were able to incorporate and consult these students and faculty, especially when like people from specific backgrounds or disabilities come, because we know who to contact, we know who would best like who would be the best contact for them to discuss what they need, because sometimes being aware of the diversity factors is just not enough. Sometimes it's always best to be in contact with the person who knows the best.
I think too, with increasing diversity among students, there's a lot of value to speaking to students about what their own experiences with diversity or their unique backgrounds, their unique gender identities, their unique experiences, bringing that to the OT realm. I think when I've talked to younger students, echoing what Dr. Mills said about reaching out to those younger students at that high school level, right, when they're more open to seeing what's out there, they're not yet in their college academic realm, and they have some openness about what they might be wanting to pursue. Being able to give them that exposure early, there's a lot of value that we as professionals can add when we're telling young students early on, hey, your diverse background is so needed in the field of occupational therapy, and here's why. I think that in healthcare there are fields where that diversity, just in how we treat, or how treatment plans are made, how we interact with patients, isn't always there at the forefront. And occupational therapy just has this beautiful way of being able to really highlight the uniqueness of people's diverse backgrounds, and to really use that as an advantage. And so I think that talking to students early about, you have a place in this field, and this field really does want to use your diverse background. We want it to grow through that. I think, just highlighting that for students too, and making them aware that that's something that's valued.
Great, thank you all so much. So the next question we have is, when was a time a diversity effort in your workspace was successful? What impact did you see?
So I can speak to this kind of from my perspective. So I currently work at St. Louis Children's Hospital in St. Louis, Missouri, and the entire hospital system right now is actually trying to overhaul our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And so we're actually, as a hospital system, growing that DEI department. And so now it's overarching for not just the Children's Hospital, but for all of the hospitals within our system. And so with that kind of expansion, we've started developing our DEI committees kind of for different departments. And so the therapy and audiology services, which is where occupational therapy is under at St. Louis Children's, is one of the kind of first committees that popped up out of that for the kind of at the grassroots level among healthcare professionals, especially at that patient care piece. So we've probably been up and going for maybe 4 months. So very new, but kind of one of the fun successes we've had recently is that we've been working with the hospital-wide DEI group to pass out a cultural competency assessment. And so that is an assessment that the kind of hospital-wide system developed, I think, over the past year, that asks really nice questions about, and then kind of asking questions for you to assess what is your own background, what's your experience with diversity, where are places that you can grow. And then from that assessment, actually giving tangible things or ideas that we can use to expand our diversity. So we're looking at diversity just with understanding what healthcare looks like in St. Louis. St. Louis has quite a history of racism in healthcare, of inequity in healthcare. And so understanding how, those experiences for some families, for some patients here still in the St. Louis area are very real for them. How can we as practitioners support that? And so we just launched that assessment to our DEI committee. And it's been really nice to start having conversations with, with my colleagues that, we talk about patient care. We talk about how are your families doing? How's your day doing? But just being able to know that we're kind of all taking this assessment together, starting to open the conversation of, I didn't realize that this happened. I didn't realize that people could have these experiences. And I will say, from my experience, our department is primarily white women. And so we probably have less than 10, we probably have less than 10 practitioners of color in a department that spans about 6 locations and probably has over 100 employees. So it's been really nice to start opening kind of conversations that many of my colleagues didn't feel that they could start just because of their own backgrounds. But just being able to launch that assessment, it's been really nice to kind of open the lines of communication and start creating a safe space kind of within our department, just, you know, for us as a team.
I really wish I could share. I experiences. I loved hearing what your hospital is doing, Maria. My background has been in acute care for over 20 something years. I've worked in acute care hospitals here in Georgia, and while I was in school in Pittsburgh. And you know, I can't tell you that I've ever heard of a diversity effort that I was aware of in the hospitals and everything that I worked at, or even in the hiring processes when I've worked, and I've worked for multiple hospital systems. And I guess in one way, it didn't come up. So, you know, feel like I've hired on my skill and qualifications for the job from just me personally speaking on that. But I have not heard of that effort. And so I think, you know, I know the question is about what has been successful, but I think this is the other side of it, is that many places do not have anything that addresses this area. I think within the last 2 years, and I speak on this, you know, and even, you know, what Dr. White said initially in starting off the examples of what we've been through in the society in the last 2 years and experiences have really pushed these issues of diversity and equity inclusion to the forefront. I mean, Brunel, that I work at, that has been this campus or university has existed, I think, over 100 years. Initially started as a women's college, and they just have actually one person now that has started, and it's a small university, I can say that, but still, we just started having someone that does DEI here in our campus as a new position. And so I wish that more can be done, and I hope that a lot of employers are looking at having different roles and people dedicated to this. And I often, you know, I talk with my colleagues and my students, and just like, why do you think that is, that this hasn't come out? This hasn't been. You can Google these positions, look for DEI, and look at how many jobs there are right now that are needing people to head this, not necessarily to hire in the workplace, but there are many employers now that have initiatives or have departments and hiring people to head these initiatives and role within DEI. And I think it's great. I think I feel sad, one, that it is just occurring. I feel sad that it's just occurring, that it's just happening. I'm like, where has this been before? That these efforts, have they been there? Have we thought they've been there? You know, for people who are higher than me, and administrators and employers. But I'm glad. I love to hear about the success that your hospital is doing. And I think I represent the other side of it, that I haven't ever heard much on the ends that I've been in. And I just recently got out of acute care practice 2 years ago. You know, and so it's just not been something that I think either, if it was there, that employers kind of discussed, even though they all have the same phrase about, you know, hiring practices are equal. I think that now having much more awareness of DEI positions and centers or initiatives I think is going to hopefully create some change in the workforce, that many people like myself who are 20 years plus in, who realize that it's never been when we were working. I hope that the newer generations get to experience that and benefit from having these types of positions there.
Thank you both so much. Could you please tell us a time about when your identity or experience brought something positive to client care?
I can share an experience from my preceptorship when I was at Pitt. So because I lived in India for a long time, I'm very in tune with what Asian culture is like, especially in India. And because I've had a lot of Asian friends through the programs I've been in, I know what the culture is like in those countries as well when it comes to clothing. And something that is surprisingly very common in Asian countries is that we don't really buy our clothes from stores. We get them tailor-made, custom fit, like our physique. And so when I was on preceptorship, I was with my supervisor and we were treating a client who was a Vietnamese lady, and she was a tailor early on in life, and she was recovering from a stroke. And one of the activities that we were giving her is folding clothes and like buttoning her and buttoning shirts. And while we were doing the activity, she was taking a bit of time and like just redoing the steps again and again, even though at one point the therapist was like, it's okay, like we can try again tomorrow, you've done a really good effort, but she wasn't taking it. And it kind of seemed like she wasn't listening, and she just kept on trying again and again and again until finally she did it and she stopped. And what my supervisor is telling me is like, it looks like that she's showing signs of perseverance, which is something commonly seen with stroke at times. But like when I heard that she was a tailor, I'm like, I don't think that's the case. I really do think that because she was a tailor, perfectionism in terms of folding, making sure the button is like on straight and everything is in line is something that's very common in that occupation. And because like I was very familiar with this concept because I grew up in India and like I stitch myself, I was able to tell her like, I don't think it's because of perseverance. I think it's really because of her occupation. And we gave her a few more like activities to do with clothing and like without clothing, and it only pertained to like the clothing aspect. And so my supervisor's like, yes, I can see what you're trying to say. It's definitely relating to her occupation and it's not really a symptom of the stroke. And so I feel like my background was something that could help my supervisor see that, you know, some things are not always related to the condition that the client has. Sometimes it always has something to do with what the client was earlier on in life. And I think that my experiences with just growing up in India and like knowing how to stitch helped me really realize that fact.
I also had something come up while I was at Pitt. While I was on my level 2 field work, I got to work with a family, and one afternoon we went and we started our online session. I was working in early intervention, me, the mom, and the child, and we're kind of going through our session, and then all of a sudden I can tell mom's getting real emotional, and it's kind of coming out of nowhere. So I'm like, hey, what's going on? Her child had been diagnosed with cerebral palsy that morning, and she really hadn't talked to anyone about it yet. And she was just having a lot of feelings and a lot of fear with that. And so like we took some time and we talked about it. And it really helped her to kind of talk it out, and also to know that like I live with spasticity and myopathy. And I think it helped her because one of parents' biggest fears a lot of times when they find out their kid has a disability is they feel like they can't picture that child's future. And in particular, their future as an adult. They're worried, can my kid go to college? Can they, date, get married, have a job, own a house, travel? Like, those are the things that parents all of a sudden can't picture. They begin to kind of panic. So like being there and able to kind of help that mom picture that that future still exists for her daughter. Maybe it looks a little bit more like my life, where there's some mobility aids and there's some assistive tech going on to make those things possible, but that future's not disappearing, and that it's going to be okay, and she's going to have support through this process. It really made a difference, and I hope that it continues to make a difference for that family. All right, that was beautiful. I love that story, Kimberly.
I I wasn't, sorry, Rachel. I think Paula raised her hand, but I'm not sure.
Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
I was applauding Kamari's story.
Oh, okay.
Naturally, of course. All right, we'll move on to our next question, which is, how is health equity affected by increased diversity in the OT workforce? And while answering this question, if you could also give just a little snippet of a definition of health equity for those that may not know.
So I'll speak to kind of my understanding and how I look at health equity. So I always like to use that example, right, of equal versus equitable. Right, we can give the same service to different clients, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that service for each of those different clients is going to be appropriate, right? Everyone has their own needs, everyone brings their own skills to the table, has their own backgrounds. And so I always look at kind of health equity as being able to give the client the resources that they need, those personalized resources for them to be successful. And so, right, you can have two patients with the same diagnosis. You know, in my scenario, my specialty is pediatric feeding. So, right, I can have two infants or two toddlers who both have feeding difficulties, both extremely picky eaters. But, right, when I'm making my treatment plans and when I'm providing services and resources, what I'm providing, right, might look different based on, you know, what that family's socioeconomic status is. You know, I have some families that will come into treatment and will tell me, hey, we will buy out the entire grocery store, whatever you tell us, you know, we'll go get it. And then I have other families that are using food stamps to buy the food that, you know, they are using as a family, and then the same food that they're bringing for therapy. In feeding therapy, we naturally use a lot of food that doesn't always get eaten. It's used for a lot of exploration, and so it can be wasted. And right, when I'm looking at these two kids that might have very similar diagnoses or present similarly, I can't just make a treatment plan that treats the diagnosis or the difficulty. My treatment plan and kind of my recommendations are going to also have to take into consideration that child's needs and the family's needs, and what they're bringing to the table when it comes kind of to those personal factors. So I think that something that I'll say, before I came to St. Louis, I was practicing in San Diego. And prior to that, I was in Boston, and I had a positive experience when it came to working with kind of teams that already had diverse practitioners. And so I don't think it was ever really apparent to me how important it was to have a diverse OT workforce until I came to St. Louis and realized that, you know, whereas previously in my previous settings, I didn't feel that I was one of the only people that could speak to the experiences that some of my families or patients of color were going through, because I had other colleagues that had similar experiences to mine or to our patients. And so moving to St. Louis last year and kind of having that as my immediate, oh, like this, you know, there aren't many other OT, PT, speech therapy, audiologists, you know, just within our entire department, there aren't a lot of practitioners that identify as persons of color. So I was coming in as kind of one of few, and then seeing, you know, the majority of our patients that we serve, we have a predominant Black population, and then we have probably a smaller population of like Asian, Latin American families, but not a lot of practitioners that represent those backgrounds. And so just as one of those few therapists of color, kind of being able to speak to, you know, when families are not able to come to therapy, right? When families aren't able to bring the, you know, the types of materials that we're asking them to bring, when we're giving home programs and families come back and say, sorry, you know, we didn't have time to do this because, you know, of all of these other factors, because, you know, I'm a single mom that's, not able to do that. I have other people caring. I think, for our kids, I think just being able to speak to, growing up as Asian American and kind of living some of those experiences, having, even experiences of, hey, like I'm just having a hard week because of things that are happening, in the news, a lot of the racial inequity and justice pieces. So I think being able to speak to have that own experience and knowing that sometimes, right, your patients and their families are going to bring things to the table, things to therapy that kind of reflect that. The more therapists that we have that represent those diverse backgrounds, those diverse experiences, right, the more that we can help empathize and that we can create safe spaces for those patients so they don't feel like, I can't be my true self here. I have to put on a face, or I have to be a certain way. They can just be themselves. And I think that the more diversity that we have in the OT workforce, right, we can create that for our patients, because there's a lot of value that, like I said, I didn't even realize until, I came to the team that I'm currently on. There's a lot of value to being able to see other people that, look like you or that identify similarly to you. Especially too when what we do with OT, right? We're working on a lot of occupations that are personal. So being able to see that there are other people similar to you can just bring a comfort that I don't think we give enough value to.
I love that. That was a very well put together answer, I think. And thank you for your definition. I appreciate that as well. Okay, so our next question, as a member of an underrepresented group, how do you balance self-care and prevent burnout, especially in your roles as a healthcare practitioner?
I think this one is such a important question to address, and a huge. I think one of the main things, and I'm really more so, I think from my perspective personally, and I shared with my students last year, probably about 6 months and stuff after the protests with George Floyd and the changes and everything that was happening at the moment. And it was just, I remember an email got sent out from the department, and it was actually brought forward by students. What triggered this was we were teaching in the midst of this, and we weren't saying anything. I was not saying anything. Nobody was saying anything. We were just teaching, and all of this was going on during this time period, in 2020. And the students brought forward, like, no one said anything. Like, we were really just like, we were concerned. No, in our students' classes, nothing's happened. No one's saying anything, and it brought forward kind of the emails and the concern and what can we do. And it was really the first moment I shared with my mom. I was just like, I was overwhelmed. Like, I was in tears, crying, because I was just like, I don't know what to say. Like, I don't know, like, how now it literally, I felt like now all of a sudden everyone is like, what can we do? What can we do differently? And I remember I told my mom, I said, I just want to just be. Like, I almost I don't want to deal with it. Like, it feels too much sometimes to deal with, like, having an answer of like, how do I fix diversity issues? And I'm like, I've been Black all my life, and I've been an OT, my whole adult career. Like, I don't know what to say. And I know I did in some ways, but it was just like finally being asked and having that being brought to the forefront in a way. It was almost like the Band-Aid getting ripped off. And it's because it was like, I live it. I live the microaggressions. I live with, indirect racism. I live with it and was used to living with it and used to not saying anything, in all honesty. And I responded, in my email back to our faculty, and I was just like, I almost felt like we weren't supposed to talk about it. Like, we were supposed to be neutral. And I operated so much of my career in this neutral zone, meaning like I've been called colored and I've been, you know, I'm at a chart, but people identified me and called me a janitor, you know, and I'm just like, and dealing with it. And I've lived, you know, I'm not from the South. I wasn't born in the South, but I've been here most of my life, and it happens anywhere, but the South particularly, I'm going to play out, you know, I think sometimes has a little bit more or different situations to deal with. And I just felt like now, how do I address this? And so it was like reawakening a part of me that I was so used to going home and dealing with it personally, you know, dealing with, okay, is it, did that sound right? What someone said to me? Like, I feel weird. I feel some kind of way, whether angry, sad, disappointed. You know, I didn't know what to deal with it, but I was always dealing with it on my own. And now having it brought to the forefront was really, really emotionally heavy. And I shared with my students, I told them, I felt like, and this was like, you know, now 6 months after and stuff, I was like, it's not okay to be neutral. And I don't know necessarily how to walk that, but my self-care is to allow myself to feel okay sometimes when I feel things are not right, whether I observe them from someone else saying something to another person of color or another person that represents another concern related to diversity, that, you know, you hear comment, you hear something being said. And you know that, you know, and it's like sometimes you're so used to the blinders, you know, let me mind my own business. I don't know them. Let me not say anything. And so you carry this with you. And then I, you know, beat myself up when I go home, because then I'm like, I should have said this. And I'm not a person that comes back very quickly sometimes to moments. So, I mean, it's me, and I realize that I really have to sometimes process things. So I'm not quick to try to like call things, but I'm aware of it very to the point where I wear it. Like when something is being said, I'm like, oh, I know exactly how I feel in that moment, but I don't know how to respond all the time. So the question is balancing off. So my thing is just, I think, is to acknowledge I feel upset. I think that what that person said or did, has some undertones that are not quite right. I don't know if it's me personally. I don't know if it's my race, my gender, how I talk, how I look. I don't know what it is, but something sometimes tells me that it's off, and I need to be okay with acknowledging it. So that's sometimes, I think, a way, and it doesn't have to be, I think this goes across all lines. It doesn't have to be that you're a person of color or represent a different group or diverse group that you've experienced this. We all experience it. And I think dealing with it sometimes can be that first part of acceptance that, you know, I don't feel good about that. And I know I didn't do anything. So what could I have done differently, or what specifically happened that made you feel this way? And being okay with those conversations with myself is, I think, one part of it. And then possibly sharing it with people that I am close to, or other coworkers, and just being able to talk about it, I think, is something as a first step that's important to recognize, and to kind of come to a place that I think over time I feel stronger, I feel more empowered to say something and to do something. Whereas before, I wore that cloak very well of be neutral, be professional, you know, not wanting to stir things up or feel like people think, you know, that I'm going to stir things up because of my race, or being a woman, or I'm overly emotional about stuff, or I don't know how to take things. And so I think that's the first step to me to becoming, to keep that in balance, because your mental aspect that you deal with is tough sometimes, and we may walk that path. We feel alone, and I feel like now I feel much better, even over the last year, of that I'm not alone. That a lot of people of color and Black women deal with some of the issues and the concerns that I have, and you know, how to deal with it is still an everyday journey, a little everyday path, in making decisions and being comfortable and confident to speak up for myself and to speak up for others. So I think that that's my my take on sometimes balancing, dealing with that aspect.
I just want to say yes. Like I am just so grateful that you shared that experience, because I think I share that similar kind of way that I process. And I always think back to, and this was right after I started on our department's DEI committee. I had a personal experience where a colleague said something to me before we got a patient about how, oh, I've worked with Filipino families before, and they don't discipline their kids. This is what we're walking into. And I, as a Filipino American woman, was like, how do I respond to this? And I didn't want to stir anything up. They were a new employee. I was like, it's the end of my day. Just get through the end of the day. Smile, just stay quiet, get through the session together. This is one of my colleagues I was doing a co-treatment with. But yeah, I think giving yourself that space to say like, this made me feel a certain way, because afterwards I would be like, maybe I misinterpreted what they said. Like I would almost justify what that person, maybe they don't have that experience. Maybe I'm one of the first people that they've had that opportunity to meet. And I almost put it on myself of like, well, maybe I need to help them understand, or maybe I just need to give them that space to, they just haven't had that experience yet. And I was like, no, I am justifying something for someone that made me not feel okay. And I have to acknowledge that. And I have to acknowledge that, it made me feel a certain way. So thank you so much for sharing, because as you were talking, I was like, yes. If there was any, I was like, is there a button that I can just press that does it?
Very true.
I feel like the pandemic really amplified a lot of inequities. And I know even just with a lot of the messaging around the pandemic, there's been a lot of ableist microaggressions and not so microaggressions. There's been a lot of, oh, well, it's only people with pre-existing conditions. That's code for only the disabled people are gonna die. And it's, it's not even particularly subtle. There's been things like rationed care plans that had to go into effect due to shortages, and the formulas used in that deprioritize people like me because of the nature of my disabilities. And so there's been a lot of those things. And there's definitely been days where I'm just like, nope, I'm done. I'm not I'm taking a couple hours. I'm not talking to anyone. I'm not looking at any media or anything. And I used Occupation to cope with it. So the longer the pandemic goes on, the more and more complex craft projects I take on. So I'm now up to 3 different sewing machines. But it's working. It's getting me through the pandemic. So yay for Occupation. And just having people to talk to and be like, yeah, this whole situation is not okay, and acknowledging that it's not always our job to help the people who have made us uncomfortable become better people, even though I go through the same thing of being like, well, I should have helped them learn, but it's not always our job at the end of the day, because we deserve to feel safe too.
Yeah, I agree with what all 3 of you said. Like when Dr. Mills was talking about how when certain people say something and you don't have a comeback, or maybe the comeback comes 5 minutes, you're like, I should have said that. That's something that I really resonate with. I can't explain the amount of times somebody might have said something and I really thought about it, and maybe I should have said this, maybe I should have said that to them, so they understood more. And then I would just feel more reluctant to speak up sometimes, just because I wouldn't know. Sometimes, especially when you're working with somebody, you don't know how they're going to take it. Will it complicate your relationship with your colleagues? Will it complicate your relationship with your superiors? Especially as a new grad, I felt that a lot, especially when everybody else is a part of the majority and not a minority, and you're the only one in the department who's a person of color. There's not a lot of people in that circumstance where you can actually share your experiences with. And even though you do, they might just push it off. It's you're being too sensitive, or I just meant it as a joke. You shouldn't have taken it like that. And then you just feel okay, maybe maybe I was overthinking it, maybe they didn't mean it like that, when actually, it was something that hurt you, and it's something that should be acknowledged. And it's sad to think that sometimes you can only share it with people at home, and sometimes people at home don't understand what actually happens in the workplace. And so having a safe space, like Maria was saying, at work, to like actually talk that out with your colleagues, and like knowing what's okay and what's not okay, and like knowing that it's, you don't always have to correct everybody, you don't always have to stand up for yourself, because you should be given that right to be treated like everybody else. It's just a nice thing to hear other people acknowledge and say.
Mhm.
Well, it's very true. So, okay, so our final question, and then we've got some questions from the audience, but what are everyday actions attendees can start tomorrow to contribute to justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion in the occupational therapy profession?
I think I'm just a suggestion, or something I think of sometimes is asking questions. Asking questions in a manner that is genuine and of interest, when you don't know something about a person based on their culture or their background, or you may notice that the person is from a diverse background, that you may have just, you don't know. And I think in a way that when people show genuine interest in learning or wanting to, or just curiosity, and their question comes off from that type of energy and that type of place, is a great way to start a dialogue and for you to learn, and people feel comfortable, and actually I think we feel pleased or happy that someone would interact or ask a question like that, and we're able to answer it. And I ask questions from my students and stuff that I'm just like, tell me a little bit more, and sometimes we don't get to talk about where we're from or what your background is. And I get to tap into that in a way that I really am curious, and I love learning about people and engaging people. I mean, we're OTs, and I think that's a natural part of us, and getting to interact and use our therapeutic use of self with our clients and with each other. Sometimes we need that. So I think asking questions, learning about people, if it's something that I may preface it with, I really don't know this, and I don't know if this is a silly question, but and then ask your question. And so see, that way to learn about people, it helps shape so much about the sometimes misconceptions or misinformation or things that you just don't really know. But it really helps set you on the right path. And it's just, a way I think of creating more of an open dialogue where people feel comfortable and actually appreciate that someone is taking the effort or time to learn more about them.
I think also to, making a personal commitment to being honest. Like I said earlier, I like to sugarcoat things, or I try to hide things because I just don't feel like maybe that's appropriate in the moment. And I found that some of the best conversations that I've had about diversity, or, especially in the workplace or just with my colleagues, has been when I've been honest. Right. When a colleague has genuinely asked, hey, when there were a lot of those Asian American attacks happening, having someone ask me, how are you doing? Right. Like, how are you feeling? I think my immediate response was to be like, it's not okay, but I'm dealing with it. I'm fine. But when I made a commitment to be honest about how I felt, right, because I wasn't doing anyone a favor, I wasn't doing myself any good. And I wasn't really, I wasn't helping other people, understand my experience, when I know, right, that's what that question was for, was just genuine wanting to understand, or check in. I had to be honest. And when I could tell my colleagues, no, it sucks, right? Like I'm sitting here at my desk trying not to cry and I have to go see my next patient. I think, right, that just helped again, kind of continue to open up those lines of communication with that honesty. And sometimes, right, there's a fear that that honesty is not going to be received well. And kind of the other side of that honesty, right, is when our honesty is respectful and our honesty is genuine, it might not be taken the way that we want it from everyone, but that's genuinely, if that's genuinely how I'm feeling, and it's not perceived, the best way by someone, then I can't take responsibility for that. Kind of what Camry was saying, right? I can't take responsibility for how someone, reacts to that, right? If someone asked me, oh, how are you feeling? And they were expecting me to say I was okay. And I said, no, I can't take responsibility for, sorry, I didn't give you the right answer, right? I gave you my genuine, honest answer. I think that just continues to kind of open up the lines of communication.
I think also, at least what I've experienced with some of my students who used to shadow me when I was a clinician back in India is sometimes it's good to get out of your comfort zone and like try to experience what other backgrounds are like, or other people who have other abilities go through. Because when you're the only person in the room, sometimes it's hard to make the first move to integrate yourself into the majority of the community. And a lot of times when that's happened in our workplace, it was us who would like take the first initiative to make them feel welcome, to make them feel like, it's a safe space that you can share things with us and like clarify any kind of questions that you have. And just making sure that others feel comfortable with being able to talk to you and being able to share things, I think is a really good thing that anybody can do, regardless of what your background is.
Well, thank you all so much for your very thoughtful answers. We have 2 audience questions. So Emma would like to know what your thoughts are on the push to make the occupational therapy degree a required doctoral level and OTA required bachelor's level, and how that may further limit access to our profession for diverse populations.
I think that's a great question. And that's something that, I've just had conversations in passing with, OT students right now. I remember when I was in graduate school, right? And I'm going to be completely honest. I remember when I was in graduate school and I was in the master's degree program, and I heard the reasoning for why proponents of moving to the doctorate, the reasoning that, we'd be at the same place at the table as our physical therapy colleagues who have a doctorate, right? We'd be at the same place at the table as, our doctors, and maybe people will respect our opinions. And I remember hearing that as a graduate student being like, yes, absolutely, right? Like I want to be heard. I want my opinion to be valued just as much as that. And then I got into practicing, right? And then it became so much more apparent of, I do think that it's a limitation. My personal opinion is that I do think that it adds an additional barrier, to accessing a field that we already feel, needs more diversity, where we're already trying to seek out more diverse backgrounds among our students and our practitioners. And I think adding that higher level of education, right? When we were talking at the beginning about, when Dr. Mills was talking about when we're looking at applicants, how are we selecting applicants, right? When we're choosing between different careers, if one requires a doctorate, that's a lot of time commitment that, we need to be okay with taking on. That's a lot of, potential loans, a financial commitment. And once I started getting into practicing, I realized, right, I personally pursued a post-professional doctorate. And that was because it aligned with, my professional goals, or where I saw myself going later on in life. But, was it something that I needed to do, occupational therapy to be able to give my best to my patients and my clients? No, not necessarily. I mean, I was practicing with a master's, and I still think, right, I give the best care that I can, regardless of a master's or a doctorate. So, my personal opinion is I do feel that it adds an additional barrier. And I think that it doesn't necessarily give the flexibility that, I love about the occupational therapy field, that there is space for, if you want to grow your career and you want to pursue a doctorate, to, pursue education, to pursue management, to pursue those other opportunities, that's available, but it's not something that you have to do to be able to access the field.
I actually started out in Pitt's doctoral program. And then we hit the pandemic. And probably about April or March, I went to my advisors and said, hey, I'm really struggling. Can I please drop down to the master's? I have some health problems that mean that like the years that I'm probably going to be able to practice, especially in a really hands-on capacity, may be limited. And because of that, I wanted to get out of school sooner. And I knew it was also just going to be really what was best for my health. So I went to that, but in part of thinking about like, did I even want to ask for that? Did I even want to go down that path? Was, well, why is the doctorate important? And kind of every reason that I kept seeing for why the doctorate is better wasn't actually client-centered. It was things like, because our colleagues in other professions have done it, and so we should do it too. That's not a client-centered reason. And because I couldn't find a client-centered reason as to how it was inherently going to make me a better practitioner, and since I knew it was also the best thing for my health, I decided to go and ask for that. And I was very lucky. I was granted entrance into the last of Pitt's master's degree. And I was really grateful for that. I'm sad that we don't have that program anymore, because I do think, especially looking through a diversity lens, the higher we set that degree bar, the higher we're putting the entrance barriers. And so it's a little bit hard when we're like, well, we don't have diverse applicants, but you're looking at an entry-level doctorate. Like, I think we need to make sure that the entrance into our profession is a reasonable one.
I have a very interesting journey on this. We've only had a master's program, and at the university I'm at, and I have I have a bachelor's. My graduate degrees are from Pitt, but my bachelor's is in OT. And so I was fully bent, all the whole conversation that we spent, 3 years ago about when we were going to transition, and Brunel is a private university. And was able to transition earlier, as opposed to public universities can only transition to the OTD once it was mandated. So this was before it started. I think that I really was more agreed. I felt like it was going to raise this bar, that we would have less applicants from people of color and diverse backgrounds. I love teaching. I really, for first generation students, we have had many that have been in our program, and I really love that aspect, that they are here and with us in the program. And now I switch to tell you honestly, I have 7 courses in our entry-level OTD. I primarily have switched from teaching in our master's program to being in an OTD program. And I am an educator, so I tell you, I am able to, the flexibility in thinking and having the title, because we still have our master's program, but we have one program that is now, of course, entry-level doctorate, and we have students of color and a diverse background. We still are primarily not students of color, but still the number of students we have and the advantages that I actually feel that we need more students of color at this level. And although the number, if I really honestly sit and think about, and this is just from where I am, my perspective of the students that are coming into our master's program, into our OTD, because we do not have the GRE as a requirement, it's even. We get the same number. We literally have, I feel, the same number of students of color in our MS program as we do in our doctoral program. And we're based right, I'm not in the main campus. We're in the campus really 15 minutes outside of Atlanta. So I have seen that the number is actually kind of even, but the And I'm excited because I've loved teaching the doctoral students in a different way that I didn't even think would happen because of the thought process of the assignments and what I ask of them and how they respond to me. I'm just like, wow, this connection of where we're going as OTs and building, I think to me, and I'm not saying this in a way that I came from bachelor's, that future leaders, but the thinking and processing that I feel, depending on the program, is placed in your doctoral program and the curriculum and the faculty that are delivering it, the potential that I see and invest in this in my students, in some ways it pushed me up. I feel like I had to get to that point of, okay, what am I doing? I can't teach the same stuff. I gotta make this better. I got this. And so I'm pushing everybody. I'm being pushed. I'm pushing my students in a different way. And I feel like I'm so proud of when my students of color particularly go out, and they are a recruitment. They are the ones who are pulling that say, I can do it, we can make it. And we need more representation at this level. And so I know I didn't start here. I did not start in this path. This was not me talking like this 3 years ago. And so by the journey and the path of what they're doing and their capstone ideas and me walking them through, because I teach the research and look at their ideas and where they've been with EBP. And I sit in a different point, in a different chair at this stance from that. I feel like it's a plus. I do believe, however, that because the presence of not having the GRE could weigh in a factor. One, I think though it's positive in our element because it takes it off the table. So we don't have that. So that possibly can be a reason why we have, I think, somewhat of even numbers in either possibly our applicants or the number of students of color. So it's not a hindrance necessarily where it could be. All the students coming in are in the same boat. They are from MS or ELOTD, they have a bachelor's. So if you can have a doctorate, yes, it is more money, and the financial part is huge. And that is not necessarily change, because if we're not making more money coming out as an OTD student and an MS student, that factor, unfortunately, I don't have any answers to that one. That is a hard pill to swallow, because there is a lot more, it costs more to have the ELOTD program, to enroll in that program. And the salary wise is not, of course, I don't think there's any difference between coming out as an MS or OTD. However, I feel like I tell my students down the line and in advancing where you're going, you're getting a little bit more of the tools that possibly are not there at an MS level. And this is all individual. It is what people choose to do with whether you have a master's or OTD, because you can have the OTD and not choose to do much further growth in your career. But I feel like the OTD can lay down some of these foundational elements. And to me, it's building the future for what students of color particularly are able to contribute and do for the profession of OT. So I stand on both sides, and I'm transparent to say that I really was different 3 years ago. But being in the midst of it and teaching it, I feel differently. I feel a little bit different for where it's going. And I'm actually, I embrace it, and I use my students to recruit and share with other students and friends of color, what OT is first and foremost, and then the reasons that they can verbalize. And I give students the skills, I think, to be able and be comfortable with verbalizing, why are you in the OTD program and how is that different? How is that distinct? Versus them feeling, kind of like, a wallflower with people who don't have it, or like, why are you in the OTD? You don't need an OTD to be an OT. Empowering them to be able to talk about it is, I feel, one of the roles that I try to play with them.
Well, we appreciate both sides of the coin. So thank you very much. This is time, unfortunately. So we want to thank all of our lovely panelists for their time this evening. I know I got a lot out of tonight, and I'm sure everyone else did as well. There is a feedback survey in the chat for you to fill out. As always, you can follow us on Instagram to keep up with our chapter and all of our chapter initiatives. And that is all. I hope everyone has a really great night.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Very well done.
Thank you so much.